This is the Balanced Growth Show with Dr. Travis Perry, helping successful business professionals like you achieve balance in their lives.
Welcome to another episode of the Balanced Growth Show. I am your host, Dr. Travis Perry. Today, we get to speak with Chris May. Chris is originally from Tuscumbia, Alabama. He moved to Mobile in 2010 to attend the University of South Alabama, where he also played football. He began his career in the insurance industry in 2017, working for a captive agency for 2 years before opening LTN Insurance Services, LLC, in late 2019. Chris is passionate about helping others and truly cares about his clients. In his free time, he loves to spend time with his wife and daughter, play basketball, and pursue his real passion, searching for the best food in town. Welcome, Chris, to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, man. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. And I should probably say wife and daughters, right? You have 2 children.
I do. I've got two little girls, Isla and Lena, a 6-year-old, and then an 18-month-old. So we're in a fun, busy stage right now.
Yes. Being a dad is all that it's cracked up to be, right?
Couldn't agree more.
Love it. Well, talk to us a little bit about your journey. You know, you didn't start off thinking you're going to be in the insurance industry. So let's talk about this. How did you get to this point, owning your own business? Here you are starting a family, starting a business. Talk to me about that. How did you get there?
So definitely had no intentions of ever getting into insurance. That was not in the plan for sure. Like you mentioned there in my bio, I'm originally from Tuscumbia, Alabama, which is a small town in the most northwest corner of Alabama. Basically, my hometown is about 25 minutes from Mississippi, maybe 35 minutes from Tennessee. So the most northwest corner that you can go. And growing up, all I ever really wanted to do was be a head high school football coach and an athletic director. That was really the goal for me. I played every sport that I basically could in high school, did football, wrestled, and track. And then I had an opportunity to go to the University of South Alabama, which is down in Mobile, Alabama. And from there, like I said, plan was always to go into teaching and coaching right after college. So finished up college, got an opportunity to get into that. And it just really wasn't for me. I just learned that, one, I didn't really have the patience for teaching middle school, which a lot of people don't. So I'm sure that there's a lot of people that can relate to that. But I just realized that teaching and coaching just wasn't for me and kind of wanted to do my own thing. And every former athlete that I had known fell into sales. So some form of sales. It just feels like that's typically a pretty good fit for someone that was previously an athlete. You got to be willing to have discipline. You got to be willing to get told no, and you've got to push through some adversity, right? Typically meshes pretty well with that. So got into advertising sales and really just didn't enjoy it. I actually read a book called Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. I'm not sure if you've ever read that, Travis, but it's his memoir of how he started Nike. That Phil Knight literally went from selling encyclopedias door to door in Hawaii to what that swoosh is today. And it just gave me this business itch, man. Like I loved that book for the story and the up and downs and really the chaos that he had to go through to start that brand. And to see where it was or where it is today, I just really got this itch that I wanted to eventually kind of start my own business. So realized in that sales job that was going to be the end goal. And unfortunately just didn't really have an opportunity to do that in that time frame. My wife had just had our first daughter, Isla, and she was staying at home with her. So the reality was, man, if I go try and start a business right now, we have no money to put food on the table or anything. We just gotten out of college. So there's no savings fund to protect us for not having an income for a year or anything like that. And really just fell into insurance. The guy that really mentored me and discipled me through college called me just randomly and asked if I was happy where I was working. And I wasn't, obviously, at the time. And he told me that he knew a guy that owned an insurance agency that was hiring. So out of respect for him, not out of any interest in wanting to be in the insurance industry, I went through that interview process and left the interview and came home and told my wife, I don't care what I do, but I want to work for the guy that I just went through that interview with. It was just a really, really good, solid guy, did business the right way. I could just tell immediately from just that initial interview that I really trusted him. So really took that job with the intentions of being there for a long time and retiring. And I was there for about maybe 12 to a year to a year and a half. And that business itch came back and it just really wouldn't go away of just wanting to do my own thing. So eventually got an opportunity to branch out and do that and took it about 4 years ago now. We started in October of 2019. So we're in year 5 of business at this point.
Congrats. Yeah. And stepping out, talk to us a little bit about the faith that's needed to jump out there and try something new, but that it's yours, something that you can fail and succeed with. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it was definitely something that I'm much more risk taking than my wife is. And I think that anytime that you're in any form of business and you're going to start your own business, your spouse very much so has to be on board with it. If they are not, it is not going to be fun whatsoever. And honestly, it's probably not a great idea to do it if your spouse isn't at least somewhat in agreement of what you're stepping into. And for us, there's a passage of scripture, it's Proverbs 16:9, that says the heart of a man plans his ways, but the Lord establishes his steps. And that very much so throughout my entire life really has been my life. And there was just pieces that really fell together, fell in place that just made so much sense to make that decision. And I had an opportunity to actually go work for another guy that's actually become really my closest friend in the insurance industry to today. He basically offered me a job to come work for him. And then maybe eventually I could go start another location of his agency or do something like that. And just very blatantly was just told, this is not the opportunity. My wife just wasn't fully on board with it. I was all for it. And it just didn't really make sense with the season of life that we were in. So unfortunately said no to that opportunity. But ironically, 2 weeks later, the opportunity to start LTN basically fell right into my lap. So took that, but all that to say, really, man, I mean, my wife being extremely supportive through the process was really, really helpful because like I said, I'm much more risk taking than she is, where I was like, hey, this makes a little bit of sense. I can bet on myself. Let's go. She was more like, you might need to grow up just a little bit before you do that. Because I can tend to move a little too quickly through things where she can go a little bit slower. So having her on board with me was really, really helpful through that for sure.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough as a married man. If your wife is not on board, do not proceed and do not pass go. It is going to be a disaster. In fact, I had a friend early on who wanted to jump into the industry as an advisor. And I asked him that question. I said, hey, supportive is your wife about all this? And he's like, not so much. I'm like, it doesn't matter what company, it doesn't matter who you're with. Don't do this unless you have that full support. So I couldn't agree more with that advice. It will save you a lot of time and hassle because you both have to be in it, right? You both have to be in on the long term, the ups and downs of any business, but in the financial planning business, obviously there is a lot of considerations, and you just need to be on that same page. So good for you. I'm glad that you guys are doing so well. You have a family, you have children, you have the struggle of being a dad plus business owner. What would you say is your biggest struggle of trying to grow your business while keeping the balance between being there for your wife and your children and all the other responsibilities that you have?
I would say that for me, learning when and how to say no to things is extremely important. When I first opened LTN, I had this opportunity to insure what I thought was going to be our biggest client that randomly got referred to me was the general liability on an airstrip. And all I'm seeing is, oh man, we're 2 months into the business at this point. And I'm like, man, if I write this account, this may pay for our rent for the whole year. This would be great. So long story short, I basically go through the whole process of trying to find a carrier that would write it, go through all the headache of underwriting it and all that fun stuff. Long story short, it ends up being like a $1,500 a year policy. And for anybody that doesn't do PNC insurance, we typically make like 12.5% off of a policy. So it's like, okay, I would just did all this work for 3 weeks to make $175. And then come to find out my E&O insurance doesn't even cover aviation. So I had to tell the account no. And I tell that story to say that it was the first time that I really realized that, man, every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. And I had to realize that not only do I have to learn when to say no as far as an account, or when do I have to say no as far as a client that I want to work with, or know when to hire somebody, but man, you've got to learn when to say no to even something like this, like a podcast, like learning that your time is your most valuable asset and you can't ever get it back. All those cliches and whatnot. But I don't learn without bloodying my nose and running into the wall. And that was the instance for me that I ran into the wall and realized, man, you've got to learn when to say no and what to say no, and don't move so fast through things. So, coupling that really with time, I'm just naturally really impatient, which is good and a bad thing. I like to move fast through things, but sometimes I can be a little rushed and a little hurried. So learning when to say no and learning how to manage that time of when and how to say no was definitely a difficult lesson for me in the beginning. I'm still not great at it by any means, but it's something that I feel like constantly, is really always front of mind for me.
And this is a really great point. I mean, knowing when to say no, because you're saying, when you say yes to something, it's possible that has a lower value, right? Business wise, life, in any other aspects of life, versus what it is that you are saying no to protect the higher value. So for you, and let's unpack this a little bit. What would you say, Chris, has been something you live by? How is it you say, yeah, I'm going to say no to these things and yes to these things? What is it that is the barometer for you?
Man, that's a great question. I would say that there's a few things for me. The first of which is going to be prayer, and just like seeking the Lord and just seeking that Proverbs 16:9, the heart of a man plans his ways, but the Lord establishes his steps, was and still is really the biggest thing for me. I think secondly, it's talking to my wife, and not from an asking permission standpoint, but just we're one, and she's my person, and she's who I'm going to rely on. She knows me better than anybody on this planet, and she can tell me pretty quickly, I don't think that what you're doing makes sense, and I'm going to listen to it. And then I think the third piece for me is seeking counsel, whether that may be from a mentor, or if that's from somebody else that's in your line of business that is 2 to 3 years farther down the line than you are. They've got more experience than you, and they've probably gone through the same thing that you're going through right now. So having somebody that can be a listening ear is crucial. I would say having some form of mentor, having some form of somebody that's on the same page as you, that wants to push you in the same direction. I think that a combination of those three is really what I've used to help make those decisions along the way. And something that has really been prevalent in my life this year is, I told my wife at the beginning of this year, one of my biggest goals was, I want to learn how to slow down. I want to learn how to say, you know what? I don't have to answer that today. I can sleep on it for 24, 48 hours. It doesn't have to be done immediately. Let's just take some time before we make this decision. And I think that has alleviated so much stress for me. Because like I said, I can be impatient. I like to move through things really, really quickly. And I've got a really, really high natural sense of urgency, which is a good and a bad thing. It's good in a sense of, if you give me something, it's typically going to get done as long as I see the value in it. But I also can just rush through stuff and can miss some details and can miss maybe a conversation that needs to be had before I make that decision. And I think that for me, learning to just take a breath, hey, let's just step back, just sleep on it. It'll be okay to make that decision tomorrow. You don't have to say yes or no right now. I know I said three things earlier. It's kind of my barometer, if you will,
Sure.
of how I make decisions. But I would add that fourth there is time. There's a book that I read called Sacred Pace that's around that whole concept of just slowing down and being in neutral and not running at 100 miles an hour constantly. And I think that that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah. Let's talk about business for a second. While you're keeping this balance, you're focusing on what I'd call your priorities and values. What is it that's allowed your business to move forward and grow while you're focused on, your balance?
Man, that's a good question. I would say really the people that I brought on board have been really, really helpful in doing that. It definitely hasn't just been me. Some of the people that we started the business with are no longer with us, that they went on to kind of go do their own thing. So having really, really good people definitely helps with that, because there's only so much that one person can do. And even though those people aren't here anymore, I'm still super thankful for the time and effort that they put in while they were here, because without that help, we're not to the point that we're at right now, for sure. I also think that for me, I'm really, really curious just as a person. So I always am looking to grow and looking to do something to improve. Talking back to Shoe Dog, and sorry to keep giving you book references here, but my life is kind of a walking cliche. I like quotes and I like one-liners because it's easy to remember. But from Shoe Dog, Phil Knight says, life's about growth. You either grow or you die. And I think that I've taken that really to heart just as a person, that I realized early on really made some mistakes in hiring, and not in hiring people, but in setting expectations for those people, if that makes sense. It was more of, I hired the right people, but I didn't set the right parameters for them to help them be successful for the long term. In the immediate, super successful, they did great, but really aligning with what their goals wanted to be 3 and 5 years down the road, I didn't do a great job of that in the beginning. So I had to learn and really pivot as a manager of people and as a leader of a business, that having a willingness to just be okay with being wrong. Like, man, I made a decision, I'm just going to wear it and move on. Or I made a bad decision, let's just wear it and move on. I think that has helped us grow from a standpoint of just having some self-awareness of knowing, man, I'm not really good at that. I'm not really good at this detail. Let me find someone that can help me with that, instead of me just trying to throw something against the wall and hoping that it sticks.
Yeah, you mentioned in the pre-show, as we were getting to know each other a little bit, about your business and how referrals have been integral in this process. Talk to us a little bit about how that has played into your growth, and how, as you've been growing and scaling, the importance of management and leadership.
Yeah, like you mentioned, we probably 90 to 95% referral based up to this point, which is a really, really good thing. I'm super appreciative of the referral partners that we've had up to this point, that we built relationships with, that they trust us, and knowing that we're going to get the job done for them and for their clients. It means a ton to us for sure. But it also, that there are some cons to that. Like we were talking about, off air here, that you don't necessarily get to pick your clients. And that can at times be difficult on down the road if you're just doing something for the relationship with the referral source, and you're not doing it because it's the right target client for you. So we definitely have been built off that, and that's extremely, extremely helpful for us. But like I said, it does have some cons to it too. And learning, really, I would say that year 3, so last year, was the hardest year for us so far, just because the first year and the first 2 years is, at least on the PNC side of insurance, personal lines, home and auto insurance, the first 2 years, you're just trying to write as much business as possible, is really ultimately what you're trying to do. And then really year 3, when those renewals start to hit and you start realizing, oh man, we wrote a lot of monoline business, meaning we only wrote their homeowners and we didn't get the auto, we didn't get the boat, we didn't get XYZ. And it's just because we were moving too fast. We had a lot of leads coming in from referral sources. And if you're not cross-selling those, if you're not rounding out the accounts, your retention's a little bit lower. Now you have more business that you have to deal with. And some of those policies may not be, packaged or bundled. So it just makes it a lot more difficult, in having to, I think the first 2 years I really operated as a salesperson. And then last year, sorry, I was trying to think of the year. So 2022, and then this year, 2023, I flipped the switch of like, okay, I have to operate this as a business owner, not just as a producer. And I think that that's been good for us, but it's also been challenging for sure.
Yeah, no, and I can see, coming from a place where State Farm, it was always about, we're running the PNC line and let's upsell to life insurance or banking products or other things. We knew the statistics show that, one or, product versus several products, the client is likely going to stay with you if you have multiple lines. So it makes sense from a retention standpoint, in a business practical standpoint. But as you're growing and scaling, what would you say some of the biggest issues are with maybe this direction, or with just referrals, in and of itself as a basis for scaling?
Another great question. You are on it today, man, with the good questions here. It's almost like you do this for a living.
A little bit here and there.
Yeah. But I think that there's a few inherent things that make referral relationships really good, but also make them really, really tough. And to me, it's that the whole relationship is built around relationship, right? It's built around, hey, I like this person likes me, they trust me. So when they send me a piece of business, the expectation is, hey, you're going to be able to get this done. So that's great because they trust you. But when you have to say no to something, sometimes it can make that relationship a little quirky, that they think, oh, you're just the one that's just going to always get this done for me. And that's not always the case. It can't everything can't be yes. Eventually there has to be a no. And I would say the other piece of that is that a lot of times when it's referral based, or when you build everything off of referrals, it's all built around one relationship with one person. So when somebody calls in, a lot of times they're going to expect Chris, or they're going to expect whoever else is working here that they built that relationship with. And when inevitably you have to hire some staff to help with servicing, to help with renewal, to help with adding autos and whatnot, because the salesperson or the producer can't do that every single time. So when they have another relationship with, insert whatever name you want to there, it makes it difficult for that handoff. So it can all be built around, hey, there's this one person that's the do-it-all person. And if everything's built up on that, the ceiling for that type of business is extremely low. And to me, there's really a big difference between owning a job and owning a business. And there's nothing wrong with owning a job and being self-employed and just being you, right? If you're a really, really good carpenter, continue to be a carpenter. Like, just stick with that. There's no reason to switch that. But I knew from the beginning, I didn't want to just be a really, really, really good producer. I wanted to grow the business, and I wanted to own a business, not own a job. So for me, I think that switch has had to flip over the last couple of years of, man, it's not that important for me to be the number one salesperson in the agency every week. It's just not. Now, is it good for that to happen? Is it good to show, a new salesperson, hey, Chris can still get in there and produce? For sure. But eventually the ceiling on that's still just really, really low. So having to develop and learn from that aspect would be my answer to that question.
Great. Well, I know a lot of business owners, regardless of industry, they don't have to be in the financial industry. They struggle with leading and growing a team as it has, scaled, and as you're growing this company. What would you say has really influenced you as you've been learning, as you have been educating yourself about the difference between management and leadership, and how that's affected the company culture?
I would give a plug to a personality assessment that I feel really strongly about. It's called Culture Index. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it. It's the best one that I've ever taken. It's the best one that I've looked at and said, oh, wow, that's really me, and this makes sense. I think that DISC and some of those other things are really, really good, but it feels like some of those assessments can kind of box you into just, you are this, period, end of story, where culture index feels like there's a little bit more of gray area and a little bit more of flow within someone's personality. And I really beat myself up for a while when we first got going at learning that difference between leading and managing. I thought that I just had to be the absolute best at both of those. Those two things were intertwined. You can't have one without the other. And after taking culture indexing and learning about my personality and learning what I was good at and also what I was bad at, I started learning and realizing I'm a fairly decent leader. I understand and can see 3 and 5 years down the road, hey, we need to make this change now, because if we don't, this is going to hurt us in 3 years. Or we need to bet on, I think this person that we're trying to hire is going to be a really, really good hire, and be okay with eating their salary for 3 months, even if they don't produce, but we know that they're going to be good in the long run. Versus a manager is someone that's really keeping the train on the tracks and following up with people and managing the person. And, hey, were we able to get that done? Were we able to get this done? I can't stand doing that. I don't like that. I don't like when people manage me that way. So I kind of flow that downhill. I listened to I think it was on a podcast, but I heard a quote where a guy basically said, if you want to hire people that don't need to be managed all the time, you are not a good manager. And I was like, oh man, that's true, because that's what I'm looking for. But in reality, I was trying to hire myself all the time, which sounds good. But if you're just always replicating yourself, you're going to have all of your strengths, but you're also going to have all of your weaknesses. So I had to learn and develop around, okay, I may not be the best manager of people. I've got to have some concept of this and improve in this, at least until I can hire somebody to do that on down the road. And we're still not anywhere near that point now. But eventually, once I get to that point, I'll have more. I will have developed more as a manager, so that I can at least delegate to this person to allow them to manage and give them some expectations around that. So I think that a lot of people think that both of those things are intertwined. And to me, like we were talking about before the show too, like they're not. I think that they're completely separate. I think that leading and managing are two different things, and they're two different skill sets. And I had to get to the point of being okay with understanding it's okay that I'm not a great manager. Like that's not the end of the world. Double down on what you're really good at and hire around, your negatives, and hire around your weaknesses to find people that's their strengths, because there are people in the world that love managing, and that's what they wake up wanting to do every day. That's just not me.
Yeah, there is definite difference between leading and managing. And I think you hit the nail on the head there with hiring people who are you, and getting out of that rut of just trying to quote unquote, recreate yourself or duplicate yourself, when you do need the different people in different places on the bus, so to say, as far as good to great goes. Having the right people in the right spots is a big issue, I know, for a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners. What would you say are some of the other issues that you've seen? I know you're in the insurance field. You deal with a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners. There are a lot of your clientele. What would you say, as you've analyzed their situations and looked at their businesses, what are some of the issues that they face while trying to grow and scale while keeping a good sense of balance?
Yeah, that's another good question, man. I think definitely one of the biggest things that I see is that learning when to say no. I feel like that's one that every business owner, every entrepreneur struggles with to some extent at some point in their career. So I think that that's one of the most difficult hurdles to jump over. And also learning that you don't have to be everything to everybody. You don't have to be, like we were just talking about, you don't have to be the best manager and the best leader and the best producer and the best customer service representative on your team. It's okay to be really, really good at one of those things, and also go hire some other people that are really, really good at those things, like service or whatever, insert whatever you want to there. But another piece that I would say, I think a lot of people are unwilling to be wrong and unwilling to just accept, man, you made a mistake. just be okay with that, wear it, and move on. I got asked in an interview one time, I was going through the process of doing an interview with Stryker. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. They're like the biggest medical device company in the world.
Right.
They love hiring former college athletes. Like almost their entire workforce is that, because they use this personality assessment called the Gallup. If you don't pass the Gallup, they won't hire you.
Right.
And one of the questions in the Gallup was, are you a good loser? Yes or no? And my response to that was yes. And they had a follow-up to it, because obviously a lot of those sales jobs are super alpha. You've got to be a bulldog. You got to be willing to, do whatever it takes to get the sale. And they asked me, they're like, what makes you say that you're a good loser? My response was, man, I hate losing. I cannot stand it. I don't like losing more than I like winning, right? That I just don't like it whatsoever. And I'm one of the most competitive people that you will meet, period, end of story. But I think that one of the things about me is that I've learned more from my losses or failures than I have from winning. And from football, we have a term that our coach would say all the time: the eye in the sky doesn't lie. And what he means by that is the film, you get in the film room, you can't hide. If you made a false step in practice, you may be able to tell coach, hey man, you can cover it up whatever you want to on the practice field. But once you get in the film room, you can't lie because it's recorded and you see everything that's going on. So for me, I just learned from college. It's like, man, if you make a mistake and you make it full speed, it's okay. Don't do it again. Don't have the same mistake twice. Don't keep repeating this over and over again and expecting different results. So I think a lot of people struggle with that willingness to just be wrong and to just accept, man, I made a bad decision. We're going to pivot and wear it with your team. Like I had that happen, that I had something that I made a mistake on. So called a team meeting and was just like, hey guys, this is my mistake. I messed up. I'll fix this right now. Keep it moving. I just think a lot of people miss that.
Yeah. I love that. I appreciate your comments here and your truth and what you're about, Chris. The world needs great balanced leaders like yourself, and I appreciate being on the show. What advice before we end here today would you give to other entrepreneurs who are struggling with having balance while they're growing and scaling their companies?
I think you have to look 5 years down the road and figure out what is the most important thing to you and work backwards from there. We were talking about EOS earlier, the Entrepreneur's Operating System. Traction is the book that's based off of, and they're big on having a 10-year or a 5-year goal. And I think that you have to do that in your personal life too. I think that you have to look down the road and say, where do I want my family to be at in 5 years? Where will my kids be at in their phase of life? And how can I back into making decisions that are going to set me up to where I want to be in 5 years? That's really kind of the lens of how I try and make decisions on hiring, on how are we going to shift the business from personal lines to commercial lines, is really all based on that. And I think in anybody that you ask them, hey, what's your number one priority? You hope, and most people are going to say that they're family. But a lot of times their actions don't really say that. And I'm speaking from a place of, I struggle with that 100%. I don't struggle with being at home. I'm not going to work 12 to 14 hours a day. That very rarely happens for me physically, but mentally, my brain is always running on, how can we do this different? How can I make this decision? How can I do that? And that pours over to home. So I've had to look and say, like, how can I set some parameters up around my life to not do that? If it's setting up do not disturb on my phone to keep me from looking at it. Like I cut my text message notifications off like 5 years ago. My wife can't stand it. She figured out that Facebook messaging, I get a notification from Facebook Messenger. So now all of my messages from her Facebook. But anyways, I think that you have to look 5 years out and back your way into where you want to be in 5 years and start making decisions today to set that up.
Great advice. Appreciate you having you on the show and being such a great guest. If people want to reach out to you, maybe they want to join your team, or maybe they want to connect with you and network and just be able to get to know each other better, what's the best place to reach you? How can they find you?
You can find me on any social media except TikTok. I'm not on TikTok. So LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, any of those things. You can check us out on our website. It's just ltnins.com, or you can shoot me an email. It's just chris@ltninsurance.com. Please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to chat and help in any way that I can.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris, for being on the Balanced Growth Show. If you've loved us, like, share, subscribe. Till next time, everyone, listeners, we'll see you on the next episode of the Balanced Growth Show. Until then, remember to live life on purpose.